Greg, thank you very much for your time and for helping with this project. Can you quickly describe what you do in the organization, what company you're working for, and just a couple of minutes?
So my name's Greg. I work for Natwest Group. I am the principal researcher in the Human-Centered Design Center of Excellence that's housed within the marketing division. As that person, what I do is not only manage a research team within that and function, but I also speak with stakeholders across the group, regardless of brand or whether it's retail, commercial, what have you, and try and disseminate and be the flag bearer of human-centered design and research. What I also do is I work across the bank in all the research teams that are kind of spotted in all the different divisions across the bank to build the research operations, the tooling and the infrastructure that is one bank and bank-wide for all these research teams. What I learned in an agency that I worked in early on in my career was effectively, as a consultant, it's not about your work, it's about how your work raises the profile of the person that you're trying to provide the work with. So a lot of researchers and maybe UX designers in general, I'm not going to say a lot, but you know, we often get lost in our own work and feel like we want to be important. We want to make sure that people know this is our work. We did this. We've influenced people, and yeah, ultimately I want to do that as well. But I think the best way of getting there is to enable other people to feel like they've thought of using me or bringing this person on and making them feel important in some way of it was their idea. And it's actually like, I mean, it's no huge trick. It's something that Dale Carnegie actually wrote in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's kind of like one of those things. So I try and do a bit of that. And this book was written in the 1940s kind of thing. So
I remember I read this.
yeah,
Interesting. I've never thought about that book in the context of research and organizing the team.
well, but it's so general, right? So you like, I mean, to start off the what you talked about as a prelude to this interview, it's you know, how do you, whether I'm working with another researcher or whether I'm working with stakeholders, how do you influence people? Whether I'm trying to work with you or with people in the property management to try and get this lab going. I know I can't win every battle, but if it's better than what existed before, then at least it's a little win. And this, what we're sitting in right now, in my humble opinion, is 10 times better than what this organization had even 2 years ago, or pre-COVID, I guess 3 years ago. So I can be happy about that. But I'm not happy for my own sake. I'm happy because when researchers come in here and they start using it, they're happy. They feel like they can do their job. That's what I find rewarding.
Interesting. A couple of things you said, I think, are pretty unique. Like, for example, when you said that you manage the expectations and experience of stakeholders as well.
I wouldn't say I definitely manage
Mhm.
expectations, but yeah, you have to manage stakeholders in general. Yeah.
Mhm.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's a good point. From what we usually see when we work with big companies, is that researchers or people managing research teams, they look at their team, they look at their peers, they look at their internal clients, but the structure above them is kind of a blind spot. It's either they just receive commands from there, like this is what we need to do, and they just move on doing that, or they expect people managing them to know what research is, what researchers need, and how to build the whole system, which is often not the case. Can you share a couple of maybe either tips or your experience on how to work with their senior management to help them, kind of to help you?
That's a tough question. Um, I think you have to remember the long game. I think you have to stay true to your ethics, but also be pragmatic about, again, you know, uh, especially in especially in organizations and commercial research, it's vastly different to academic research, and so it's easy to get lost in wanting to be purist about the human-centered design approach or UX research, and I'd love to be purist and conduct desk research for 3 months to really build assumptions and hypotheses about what we're trying to find, and but that just simply isn't going to happen in the commercial space. So getting back to your question, how do you influence those above? Um, I think you start off with working with your management and raising their profile. So again, going back to that idea where you have your line manager or even your line manager's line manager, and you make them look better by what you deliver to that they can kind of shout about um, to their boss or boss's boss. So the word kind of travels upward, and if you're able to do that effectively, then over a longer term, what's going to happen is, or at least what I believe should happen, in my experience, is that inevitably there's this word of mouth that goes around. And that's a very powerful thing in psychology. If somebody says that guy's really good, you should listen to them. Eventually, you have these opportunities to speak with the CAO or the CMO or these individuals, and when you do have those chances, be prepared, be concise. I've stood in front of a lot of marketing directors and um, managing directors and chief administrative officers and so forth in presentations, and I know from experience now after the first couple that while you might often at times to the standard stakeholders kind of have this contextual blurb about, oh well, this is what we did and this, we did all this stuff. I remember sitting in front of a chief administrative officer in this one organization, and I started off with, so I'm Greg, I'm this principal researcher, this is what we've done, and within 30 seconds the guy just snapped and said, listen, I know all this, can we just get to the point and tell me what you found and what you think is important? And that's, while it was startling to me, that's a really great opportunity, because in that he's saying, look, I trust everything you've done. I don't need you to legitimize yourself in terms of, you know, all your methodology. I know you know what you're doing. I want you, because you're the smart one, to tell me what I should be doing in this space, because I don't know. And when you have that opportunity to be that authoritative figure with humility, just you have to jump at that chance and be prepared. I remember speaking to another person when I was doing another director when I was a consultant, and I did something she's and I don't think I've ever done since, but it was a bit of a risk. I kind of knew what she wanted to hear, but I wanted to make her feel like a part of it. So rather than just presenting to her and saying, this is my insight, I said, all right, I'm going to do something different. talked to her by name, and I said, "What's your biggest question? What do you want to know today?" And she said, "Well, this is what I'm really interested to learn. Um, Out of all the questions that we've asked you." I said, "I'm glad you asked that, because this is my answer to that." And I just went through, not the entire presentation, but I had prepared myself for that question, because from previous conversations, I had that sense that she was going to ask that kind of stuff. And yeah, so ultimately those are two examples of effectively just being well prepared, concise, and direct with more senior leaders when you get that opportunity. And before you get that opportunity, um, you know, be the same with your managers and your senior managers, and give them the ability to really value your input. So, I mean, it's it sounds very simple to say. I think it takes longer to get that experience and understand how to work with people. Um, but don't be purist. Don't say, it's either my way or the highway. You always have to kind of look for that middle ground to see, going back to what I said earlier, to see how you can create a win for the person that you're working with. Where's that common ground at the bottom level, and then work from there.
So I was going to say the same thing, that it sounds simple, but it's not simple when you actually put it in practice.
Yeah.
Because as far as I understand, again, looking at what you've done, it was a long game, and it wasn't ideal at every single step. But
It's still not ideal.
it's not ideal, but it's so much closer to. First of all, you've done it, right? You have multiple facilities, you have the whole infrastructure, and again, I'm probably biased because I was a part of building that thing, but you have a fantastic lab, two labs actually.
Thank you.
Um,
And thank you.
oh, thank you. uh, in addition to that, it was amazing to see how you managed to kind of to play the game with internal departments, kind of play their game, like how they asked you to do things, and you did that. But at the same time, every time when something didn't work, kind of you managed to admit them that, oh, we actually cannot build you exactly what you need, like we need to change something, or you need to bring somebody else who need to change that. And that was pretty unique, because every time when we talk to large organizations, I would probably say that this is number one blocker for everyone. People try to solve an issue going to internal departments. They just cannot do that. It's very difficult to admit that they can't, and it stops there. And you manage to kind of overcome that obstacle over and over again.
Yeah, I think it's perseverance. I think it's, you have a vision in mind, and and I think when you work at an organization like this one, you quickly realize that you quickly realize a couple things. First of all, you have to compromise in certain areas. But secondly, early on when I started here, there was a guy that I spoke to, and he said, you know, it's kind of who you know in the organization, if you want to get certain things done. And so with respect to perseverance, it's like, if somebody says no to me, it's not like I go to their boss and ask them, but I try and find all the players involved, and try to work as nicely as possible to find a compromise. And ultimately, there are a couple blockers that we've experienced. And in those situations, you're like, okay, so what are the solutions? And there are times when I'm like, okay, I don't have a solution here. So what are the solutions? And we had probably about 5 different groups of parties, and they're providing, they're like, well, we can do this or we can do that. And ultimately, especially for some of those blockers, it's like, well, if we don't have a solution for this, then we have to say, go to UX study for this. And there's no other way around it, because nobody else is going to solve this problem for us. So do we have clearance to get that done? It's just managing individuals, and not saying outright, banging your fist or throwing your toys at the pram or something like that, but getting everybody to feel involved and a part of the process, and making sure that you hear everybody before you kind of say, well, this is what given everything, this is what I think has to happen because of these facts. And so people can kind of follow your line of thinking.
Mm.
So fundamentally, it's about listen first, then kind of give direction.
Interesting. Kind of summarizing your experience, if you could give yourself advice from your current perspective, yourself in the past when you just started working here, what would be 3 things you would recommend yourself to do, and maybe 3 things to kind of stop doing or change?
Well, I think some of those I would still recommend. Well, it's really, really difficult. I would. It's kind of like saying, is there anything you regret? That's kind of and in some ways that's the question. And if I'm honest, I've made a lot of mistakes, or there are things that I could have done better, but it's hard to say I regret them, because I think they provide me with learnings that I wouldn't have learned if somebody said, do this or do that. But that being said, there are core characteristics, cardinal characteristics from a psychology point of view that I still have, that I have to fight against. So, for example, I'm very agreeable. I like to get along with people. And while that's a strength to a certain extent, because it allows me to work with people very, very well, there are at times where I have to push myself outside of my comfort zone and be more assertive. And like we just talked about, while I might listen, at times you have to find that space where you're like, this is where I have to be assertive and say, this is what needs to be done. And perhaps that might be a certain thing I might say. I think another thing that I would talk about is focus. I think, again, going back to the agreeableness, I do try and take on a lot, and sometimes I might take on a little bit too much, which can inevitably work against you if you have too much on and you can't really deliver at the pace or at the level that you wished to, or would rather do. So, there's 1 or 2 projects that I've worked on here where I just felt I was in a position where it was kind of thrust upon me, and I wasn't assertive enough to say, actually, no, if I do this, I'm not going to do a good job. I'm not touching this. And that's probably what I tell myself. I was like, don't touch this project, don't touch that project, because, you've already got enough on. And really, yeah, really focusing on, I think, looking back as well, I would talk a lot more to my earlier self about research ops and setting the foundations earlier, um, where I think we're still playing a little bit of catch up in this organization. I think that's another thing. So, and that's probably the biggest thing. I think while this lab is great, and it's an example of how we've finally started to really work and bring research to the fore of this organization. There there's a lot of research operations that's becoming recognized industry wide, that I could have provided the foundations for a little bit earlier in my career. We're doing it, um, but it's not as far as along as if I did it when, I was one of the only researchers in the organization, and now there's probably about 20 or 30, and we're playing a bit of catch up with that. So,
Interesting. Thank you very much. And first of all, I totally agree about you cannot grow and learn without making mistakes. And in this regard, they're not mistakes; they're just trials, right? How would you? It's kind of the basis of research itself. How would you learn something if you haven't tried something new? And if you try something new, by definition, you're going to find something that you're kind of either not very good at yet, or something just doesn't work. And it's not the fault of somebody; it's just the process of
hmm
getting to where you want to go. Um, can you can you elaborate a little bit about the foundations that you mentioned, research ops foundations? What are the most important things that you believe you have in your organization, or maybe something that you would like to develop even further?
in terms of research ops.
Research ops, but it feels to me that research ops is such a broad area. Like, for example, when you talked about how you work with stakeholders or how you organize your team, it's kind of it touches research ops as well, because it's not about research itself, right? It's it can be about management, but at the same time, it's about organizing the whole process. And I think process is about research ops,
hmm
partially.
Yeah. So I think there are a few challenges that are still ongoing with this organization, and not to give out too much detail or anything, but I think um, I think consolidating our research insights and the management of those research insights is something that's ongoing. So we have probably currently the way this organization is set up is, what we're doing is we have a number of different research teams across the bank, all doing the same type of human-centered design research in their own kind of commercial spaces. And while that's all fine and good, and they might not research the same products in general, there's a lot of crossover in terms of the themes. And because they all have their separate fiefdoms, these tend to be in data silos. So what we want to do is kind of bring all that together, and and I think especially in this day and age, information is critical, and the greater amount of insight an organization is able to share amongst itself about their customer and what their needs are and so on and so forth, the better. So there's work that we're continuing to do there. Another another thing that we're we're terribly good at developing our ideas internally, and then starting to develop them, and then looking at human-centered design research later on in the process. Um, and when I kind of get up on my soapbox and start talking to other people in the organization about this, um, I kind of I bring up Ranjay Gulati, who's an economist in Harvard, and I've seen a couple of interview clips thanks to a researcher that previously worked on the team. So, but Dr. Gulati has written a book called Reorganize for Resilience, and he talks about this idea, or in one of his interviews, he talks about this idea that, every organization wants to say that they're customer centric. And this is what Dr. Gulati says. So he says every organization wants to be customer centric. That's not a question. When you talk to a CEO of any organization, they'll say, yeah, we're customer centric. We do the best for our customers. Then he says, but when I ask them what they do, and they said, well, we get our products, we put them in front of our customers, and we ask them what they like about it, what they don't like about it, how can we improve it? And his point here is that's not, and I think more than Dr. Gulati has said this, but that's not looking at the customer. That's not being customer centric. That's actually looking at your customer through the lens of your product. And I think that says a lot about a number of organizations, not just this one. We tend to look at our customer through the lens of our products. And if we want to be a truly progressive, future-orientated organization that looks at how we develop products around our customer needs, we have to bring human-centered design and understand the experience that we're trying to achieve strategically a lot earlier in the product production process. So we're going out there and we work with customer insights to understand where the market opportunities are, but then also really look, so we get the how much and those quant statistics about that, but we also delve deeply with the why and the human-centered design aspects of that research to look at strategically what are the opportunities in those spaces, or described by Dr. Gulati, the problem spaces. And I think I think that's something that I'm really excited about trying to achieve. Certainly this lab can be a part of that. At the same time, that's something that I think 95% of organizations, especially big ones, don't do very well.
Interesting. So, correct me if I'm wrong. So basically, you're saying that companies can look at what clients need first, and then try to figure out if their product is good enough, or if they need to change the product to satisfy their need, rather than just saying, okay, we have that product now, we need to figure out how we can.
Yeah. So in summary, it's like there are two channels. There's the inside out thinking, where there are some regulations and hygiene factors and other things that we have to do to create incremental innovation, to better our products gradually over time. These are the products that already exist, that we know that are doing reasonably well in the market, and fundamentally help us run our business from a day-to-day perspective. I'm not saying we change that radically. That goes on. What I am saying is that organizations that are really making their mark invest in this idea of, all right, how do we change the future of this industry? What can we impact that's maybe aligned to our purpose? So one of the purposes in this organization is about sustainability and environment and stuff like that. How can we really impact the customer and target a market area that's really kind of in a space where it's developing, it's growing, but our competition really isn't leveraging that. And I can identify that market through customer insight, but rather than just chucking new products at it and just seeing what sticks to the wall kind of thing, strategic human-centered design research can really go in and focus what are the problem spaces and how we can deliver new products that 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 are fitted to those markets, if that makes sense. So you have to have a combination of this inside-out thinking and then this outside-in thinking from building new products from the customer perspective first. Well, I shouldn't say first, but what I mean by that is from a customer perspective that's aligned with your business values and what you see as technologically feasible with the infrastructure of your organization. This is basic design thinking kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, strategically, a lot of organizations just basically focus on the inside out thinking, like our own, and pay little or no attention to that outside in thinking that really can make huge differences to your organization long term. And I think from a managerial perspective, like an executive perspective, that's a scary thing, because ultimately working with innovation, because that's basically what it is, innovation is a very risky prospect. It's easy to bandy about the word. We want to be innovative and so on and so forth. But to be truly groundbreaking innovative, you have to risk 95% of your ideas going out and in the trash bin. But that one idea that kind of comes in can be groundbreaking. And I'll give you an example. I mean, they spent, I don't know the actual figure, but if you go to Disney World now, they have those little bands that basically scan and everything's attached to it. So, when you buy admission into Disney World, you get these smart bands that are that have all your information as a guest staying at the resort, and any photos they take can be assigned to you, but you don't have to carry it around with you. It's instantly uploaded to your own personal account online for your guest services, and you can even have, I guess, money added to your account off of that, so you don't have to carry your wallet around. You can buy stuff, you can buy merchandise, you can do all these things, all through the ability of these small bands, and they've been a huge boon to Disney and their theme parks because they make the customer experience so much easier. But that I would argue, that would have never happened had Disney not had the guts to look at, all right, we want to understand from the outside in what the theme park experience is for our customers and how we can make that better. So they spent something like 3 years just developing this idea. And, most organizations are, head down, year to year. What are we going to do by the end of this year to develop something for our customers and bring about new things? It takes time, money, and sacrifice to be daring enough to be truly innovative. And I think that's something that, going back to your original question, something that not only this organization, but 95% of the organizations out there could do better at. But I think that's a big thing for human-centered design, and human-centered design researchers play a big role in improving the consistency and the quality of innovation that can come out of that process. Because we can spot quickly through our research what ideas might fly and what ideas shouldn't be invested in further. Mm-hmm. How do you balance innovation, that groundbreaking innovation, to just keeping the business going and maintaining the status quo on the services and the products that are already successful out with your business. Is that?
Yes, and I would add one kind of add flavor on top of that. What you said about knowing people and working with specific people, uh, sometimes I think this is where it's especially difficult to stick to kind of a new groundbreaking idea, because you need
Oh,
to
yeah.
make sure that those people that kind of try to do their job well, in some cases trying to do their job well means that if you stick to the previous process that it's tested, it works well, and you don't want to change it, you don't want to break it.
Yeah, so I mean, fundamentally, going back to the question prior, as I mentioned, we don't do enough of that innovative work, right? There is innovation that happens in this organization, but I'll be absolutely clear. Um, there is absolutely, um, and and um, and the people that work in that space are, absolutely um, very clever people and know what they're doing. Um, but it's still challenging to bring at this point in time for this organization. I think it's very challenging for that part of the business to bring and implement their innovations into the mainstream portion of the bank. So it feels a little bit separated. But that's my interpretation.
Mhm.
Maybe the levels above actually see that better than I do. I can't comment on that. But when you're talking about your question, um, the teams that I work with most closely don't do that human-centered design innovation research alongside customer insight. Um, so it's hard for me to comment on that precisely for this organization. However, what I can say is in previous organizations that I've worked for, um, yeah, it's incredibly hard to stay on track. Um, and what I attribute that to, um, again, sorry, another name drop. Matt Watkinson wrote this book, I think back in like 2016, um, uh, called The 10 Principles Behind Great Customer Experiences. And in one of the earliest chapters, he talks about this idea that the reason why most organizations, most companies, most businesses, especially publicly traded organizations, don't achieve great customer experience is because the CEO's boss is the company's shareholders. The shareholders are looking reasonably from their perspective for year-on-year dividends returns on investment. Again, reasonable from their perspective, but what that inevitably creates from a trickle-down perspective is this idea that um, most of these organizations, if not all, I mean, maybe an exception to Apple or something like that, have year-on-year commitments to achieving certain goals. If innovation takes 2 or 3 years, then achieving those goals on a year-to-year basis is really intangible. And when it costs a lot of money and you have an intangible that costs a lot of money, it's very difficult for, in my mind at least, a CEO to explain that to their shareholders. We've just spent half £500,000 on this idea that is going to happen maybe in 2 years, maybe not, who knows, but we'll spend another 500 million next year if you guys don't mind. Um, I if I was a shareholder, I'd be like, I'm a little bit nervous about that perspective. So these organizations fall in the trap of these checkbox exercises where from the top down, all they're trying to do is achieve year-on-year incremental improvements in what they're trying to do, right? Um, and so going back to your question, um, I haven't found an absolute solution to that. The only experience that I really have, well, obviously I have, there's actually a couple of experiences, but the clearest one to me was from an organization that I worked with previously who was going to bust out and create this whole new innovative new website and way that they're going to sell their product and this, that, and the other. And they're spending um, a huge chunk of their investment money on creating this. Um, and they had basically they had 1 year to do it. And because it was so innovative and there's so many risks and people were learning and making mistakes along the way, and it lasted another year, it became impossible for the business to support it because it just it it didn't provide the immediate returns that were expected. And from a business perspective, that then quickly dries up when it comes to funding. So what am I saying? Um, Fundamentally, in answer to your question, I haven't solved the problem. I don't think anybody has. I think fundamentally, what you have what you have to do is the those executives have to make a strong decision about here's the direction that we're taking the business. I think there is certainly some of that for this organization. Here's what we're going to invest in. I think there's some of that in this organization. But when it comes to um, human-centered design research and bringing that to the fore of understanding those problem spaces, um, it hasn't yet happened in the organizations that I've been a part of to get that longer term funding. If that makes sense.
Hmm. Do you think that working specifically in a financial organization kind of it brings extra challenges, or is it common across
I
big
I
companies?
I think both. It's very common amongst big companies, but at the same time, um, there are there are pros and cons to every type of organization. So I worked in several different industries or consulted in several different industries. One of the strengths of being in the financial space is compared to, compared to the travel industry. Financial space has basically a lot more money at its disposal to make improvements, but there's a lot more investment in the infrastructure in general, and there's a lot more scrutiny in practices. Like if our services go down for an hour, we're going to get fined by the FCA for £1 million or 1.4 billion pounds or something like that. It's so we have to make sure that we can't, or a financial institution is incredibly adverse to risk. So going back on the innovation stuff, which is inherently risky, that is very, very tricky for a financial institution to have this mindset of we're going to be very risk averse over here, but when it comes to innovation, we could be a little bit more, free to move around here. And I think, to be fair to this organization, we are moving into an area that's similar to another large organization I worked at in my early career, um, where there was a distinct process from research and developing product ideas, to incubating those ideas, to merging those ideas or bringing out new products from those incubators that are successful. So, and how that process worked was, you have 1,000 ideas that come out of the research, and they're free to do whatever research they want. There's a lot of freedoms there. Not so much here, but there were a lot of freedoms there. But there was a recognition for that organization that 90% of those ideas would be chucked out. Effectively, they wouldn't make it to market. But as long as those ideas were part of the, there were journal articles published, or a certain number of patents submitted, this was their bread and butter as far as the research side of it was concerned. But a lot of those would just go into the library, wouldn't see the light of day, but 5 to 10% of those would make it to the incubator. And from the incubator, they start developing them and seeing how it could work out from a business and market approach. And then out of all that, some of the incubators failed. In fact, most of them failed. 9 out of 10 of them failed. But the one that didn't made the organization money. And the ones that didn't, the ones that ended up going out there and making a lot of money, could help continue to fund the research. Though some of the ones that didn't end up succeeding, what they might do is sell the patent onto another organization who would buy the patent, and it would fit more in their business model. So it's a win-win, and I can imagine, and this is really just me, but as we become more and more technologically advanced as a society, the organizations that are able to commit to spending that amount of research and allowing those research divisions to just kind of let loose, and having that method of going from research to incubation to marketization, let's say, are going to become, are in my mind the more successful organizations, because I think I see that, although I haven't worked there. I can see that for Google, I can see that for Apple, I can see that for Microsoft, because a lot of my peers work for those organizations, as you did. But I think that type of mentality is bleeding into other industries and slowly changing the culture of other industries to adapt to that kind of way of doing things, because ultimately I think it becomes more successful in the longer run.
How do you make sure that there is a common trend in research that lasts longer than a tactical goal for this quarter? Like, for example, do you conduct studies on something for a year, for more than a year?
I think the quick answer is here is no. I think that's another area that what we could do better on.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I've always relied upon when talking about research and research studies and creating longevity in any report that you build, it's about storytelling, and it's as much as possible tying back themes to, being a psychologist, tying back themes to principles in cognitive psychology, or say, for instance, because we do a lot of visuals, Gestalt psychology, or anything to do with something that can be easily found and tied back to things that are kind of well known in the literature. I think that's really important. It can be a little bit ad hoc, but the more you're able to allow your stakeholders to see where where those themes are tied back to Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, or um, Barry Schwartz's choice paralysis, or all these things. And you can say, if you want to read this guy and understand more about this thing that we're kind of seeing here,
Mm-hmm.
and this is how it manifests itself in your UI the way we've designed it, you can do that. And so it kind of, I think, brings relevance and longevity to those findings, because it because you're tying it to a theme or a psychological principle. It creates a certain sense of permanence. It creates a certain sense of, yeah, it's not just the button in the wrong place. It's bigger than that, but it's also the button's in the wrong place. So they understand how to fix it, but they also understand a general rule of thumb. If you just create usability testing reports that say fix this here, fix this there, then it just creates them a list of yeah, we need to fix these things. In a sense, metaphorically, it's like you can fish for somebody, but it's better to teach them how to fish. In this sense,
Mm-hmm.
you're saying it's not just how to spot the problems, or it's not just spotting the problems for them, but by tying it back to themes, you enable them to think more broadly about, in almost a heuristic sense, not to make the same errors in other situations.
Mm-hmm.
And it also, people love to learn. And if they feel like they're learning and they're part of this journey of, I understand a little bit more about the psychology now and the psychology of my target user, they always kind of embrace it a bit more. So, yeah.
Interesting. I wonder if you can give an example, maybe of something that was already released or something that you can share, of tying that some of the principles to specific thing that you worked on or you proposed to change.
Oof.
It's a
Uh,
tough one.
that's a tough one. Um, I haven't been doing research exactly for a couple of years now. I've been mainly working on the research ops,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just thinking back about some of the last stuff, um, and I'm just trying to think of the specific example within a report. Uh, Let me think about
But
it.
yeah, but
Can I think about that?
yeah,
And like
absolutely.
we can have like a kind of add-on
Yeah,
interview.
sure. So that was the second one.
Yeah.
So in this case, can I switch to another question? Um, what you said is very interesting. So you said that in information you share to your organization as a report or as like a formal writing, in addition to specifying specific issues with this interface or this button, you also add kind of a learning opportunity to help other people to kind of to train themselves how to spot those or prevent those issues in the future. Um, Earlier you mentioned kind of a repository of some sort where you would like to keep all the information about previous studies. Do you think that kind of meta finding about kind of a trend or learning how to prevent specific issue should be in that repository as well in some form?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. One of the things that we're working on is bringing all these insight repositories in, but I think we need to work better at how to, on a regular basis, we all get into the practice of ensuring that we're tying it back to themes and being able to really express our findings in this way, to create a sense, to create longer lasting research reports. Because as a stakeholder, if I didn't attend the research debrief and updates and yeah, so if I didn't attend the research debrief as a stakeholder, then if I just read the PowerPoint and it says this, and this, then I'll be like, okay, well, that was great. We've fixed all those issues. We haven't fixed that one, but we can't fix that one right now, and we can't fix this one. So it's just like a practice of, yeah, I'm going to throw out these things. I'm going to know that these other findings are all done, dusted. So that was a waste of my 5, 10, 15 minutes of reading a PowerPoint slides. But if we make it thematic and we talk about here are some themes, then and here are some examples of themes that are being breached, then it's like, okay, hopefully what we're doing, and I can't say this for certain, but hopefully what we're doing is, again, yeah, we're educating stakeholders to understanding how to avoid the same mistakes in future, but they can also start to appreciate more the thoughtfulness and the the expertise that researchers bring to the organization. You know, with those kind of throwaway reports, I can imagine it's easier for people to say, "Well, I could have done that. I could do that." So many people in this, being a psychologist and being a researcher, if they watch me do a facilitation, you know, the number of times somebody has said to me, you make it look easy, and I got in the same position, and it's just a whole lot harder than I thought, because watching you, they don't necessarily always appreciate the thoughtfulness that goes into research. But if you're able to tell that story and bring it back to principles, then there's an acknowledgement that they're paying you for your intelligence and the insight that you bring. It's not the methodology, it's you as an individual. What do you know that they don't?
Thank you very much. It was super
Yeah, that's
interesting.
brilliant. Thank you. I appreciate your time.